Hi, my name is Garrett Wooldridge, and today for my oral presentation 4 for Geology 105, I'm going to talk to you about tetrapods. I'm first going to give you some background into tetrapods, and then I'm going to talk about their evolution, the species they evolved from, the types of tetrapods which first existed, the environments they lived in, how they've evolved, and then the methods and techniques scientists have used to conclude all of this. The word tetrapoda means four legs. Tetrapods were the first four-limbed vertebrates and their descendants. The classification of tetrapod includes living and extinct amphibians, reptiles, mammals, birds, and some ancient fish, such as the coelacanth. Yes, this includes dinosaurs also. Humans are considered tetrapods as well, even though we don't walk on four legs, because we descended from a four-legged animal. Tetrapods are part of a larger group called the Sarcopterygi. Sorry, it's a hard word to say, which includes lobe-finned fish, which are just one group of animals with backbones, known as vertebrates. Tetrapods have what are called fleshy fins, meaning their limbs are covered by muscle and skin. Some tetrapods have retained their ancestors' bony rays, called lepidotrichia, at the ends of their fleshy limbs, but these have been lost in most flesh-finned animals. The evolution began about 395 million years ago in the Devonian period as tetrapods began to evolve from lobe-finned fish. These lobe-finned fish had scales and fleshy fins. They also had lungs, which were able to breathe oxygen. The lobe-finned fish had bottom fins with arranged pairs and internal bones, which was a necessary feature for these fins to develop into the primitive legs. Between 390 and 360 million years ago, descendants of these organisms began to move to shallow water, and then eventually moved to land. What evidence do we have to support these theories? There is much evidence to support the knowledge, including the fact that scientists have found fossils and ancient rocks of animals which look like fish but have oddly fleshy fins. They had found fossils mostly in the northern hemisphere, but also in Australia, which had been dated back as early as 385 million years ago, but have recently found tetrapod track marks in Poland, which had been dated to as far back as 397 million years ago. The evolution of tetrapods is not a science which is set in stone by any means. Fossils are still being found and studied to learn more about when and where they first emerged. In 1938, a fisherman in South Africa caught a fish which had these fleshy fins, a coelacanth, which were thought to have gone extinct 80 million years ago. Coelacanth are lobe-finned fish with muscular fins. Lobe fins on living fish are only found on coelacanth and lungfish, which share a common ancestor with tetrapods. So what types of tetrapods first existed? Everyone has seen the iconic image of a brave fish crawling onto land, evolving into the first vertebrates and tetrapods. This image helps simplify the process of evolution, which in reality occurred very slowly over a span of millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. Various species of prehistoric fish moved to land at various times, beginning around 930 million years ago, making it difficult to identify a direct ancestor of modern-day vertebrates. It is also hard to distinguish between the most advanced lobe-finned fish and the most primitive tetrapods, as this transition happened over millions of years, and there's lots of in-between phases. Three genera, which were closer to fish than tetrapods, called, bear with me, these are hard words to say, Eusthenopteron, Pandarictithys, and Osteolopsis, spent all their time in water, but had defined tetrapod characteristics. The quote-unquote midpoint between lobe-finned fish and tetrapods can be said to be the tick-tock. The tick-tock had the primitive equivalent of wrists, which helped it prop itself up on its stubby front fins along the edges of shallow lakes. These species also had flexible necks like modern-day tetrapods. This species and others like it are referred to as fishopods, as they have a mix of tetrapod and fish characteristics. The first true tetrapods were the Acanthostega, which dates back to 395 million years ago. These animals had slender, fin-like limbs. Paleontologists once believed that these tetrapods had spent significant time on dry land, but after finding fossils in formerly aquatic areas, now regard them as mostly aquatic animals, only using their primitive legs and lungs when necessary to avoid predators or feed. These first tetrapods had 7 or 8 digits at the end of each limb. When looking at the evolution of tetrapods, there is a 20 million year gap in the early Carboniferous period where no fossils have been dated from. This period is called Roemer's Gap. There have been many tetrapod species found which date back to after Roemer's Gap, many of which were almost true amphibians at that point. There is a diverse collection of fossils found, including toad feet creatures and lizard-like animals, after Roemer's Gap, providing evidence that evolution accelerated during the gap, which has frustrated paleontologists hoping to study the evolution of tetrapods, because there's just this blank 20 million year gap that they can't study they don't have any fossils that they found dating back from that time. Some of the most notable early tetrapods were the Ichthyostegus and Toluripitons. The Ichthyostega was one of the most iconic fishopods between fish and tetrapods, which had limb-like flippers it used to crawl onto land, as well as webbed feet, and the ability to breathe air for short stretches of time. The Toluripiton was one of the first true tetrapods, having a lizard-like structure with well-developed legs and 6 toes on its front and hind legs. So, how do we know all this about early tetrapods, which roamed the Earth almost 400 million years ago? Using carbon dating of fossils, paleontologists are able to figure out roughly how old a fossil is. They can also use context clues based on the location of where the fossil is found and what is known about that location and its features to piece together how old the fossil is. The bone structure of tetrapods have similar characteristics, like how the limbs develop from limb buds in the womb, and how the limb bones are connected to the skeleton, such as the ball and socket joints connecting the femur and pelvis. Comparing these known traits to tetrapods to fossils found shows how close the animals were to modern-day tetrapods. Combining this knowledge with knowing how old each fossil is helps scientists or paleontologists track the evolution of tetrapods. For instance, taking a fossil of an Acanthostega and other early tetrapods, scientists can study the jaw mechanics of the lower jaws found on these animals. By using advanced engineering methods to simulate biting action of these fossils, they can show that the jaws were more similar to fish than modern-day tetrapods. This information helps scientists conclude that these early tetrapods lived and fed aquatically. A study performed by the University of Chicago had an interesting take on the evolution of tetrapods. It showed that the genetic capabilities for tetrapods to develop limbs and fingers and toes, enabling them to walk on land, was present in much more primitive fish. This study suggests that the evolution of lobe-finned fish to walking tetrapods might have been somewhat predetermined within its DNA, instead of simply evolving to survive. This is a controversial study and is still being researched, but has interesting implications on how scientists study evolution. Sorry, my computer's about to die. Now I'm going to talk about the environment the first tetrapods lived in. The first tetrapods appeared in shallow freshwater streams, rivers, lakes, and wetlands. As tetrapods evolved, they spent more and more time feeding and walking on land. However, most of the early tetrapods spent the majority of their time in freshwater sources, as they provided a safer environment, buoyancy against gravity, easier reproduction as eggs and sperm could be released into the water, and long-distance traveling with less energy. The transition to land meant overcoming these obstacles and adapting. One theory of why the lobe-finned fish evolved into tetrapods, scientists believe, is that major climate change and increasing temperatures causing droughts forced them to adapt to surviving in dry conditions. These droughts had the most impact on shallow water, providing further evidence that tetrapods occupied shallow water sources. Another theory is that they were chased out of the water by bigger fish. Dry land provided safety from predators and an abundance of insect and plant food, as life was scarce on land. As sea levels declined and smaller creatures died out, there became more competition for food, which probably led to the migration from the sea to land for the early tetrapods. How have tetrapods evolved? The evolution of tetrapods was a long process. As lobe-finned fish moved to land, natural selection shaped many of the adaptations, as these animals faced new challenges on land that they had to adapt to for survival. All tetrapods, including humans, show evidence of the aquatic past we came from, for instance, in the way our arms and legs are attached to our bodies. Some tetrapods have lost all of their four limbs that their ancestors had, but are still considered tetrapods. Examples of these are whales and snakes. The common ancestor of the lobe and ray-finned fish had lungs as well as gills. The lungs stuck around in the lobe-finned fish, evolving into tetrapods. Organisms such as the coelacanths and lungfish retain their lungs as well as their gills. There is evidence indicating that modern-day tetrapods once had gills, but lost them in the early process of evolution as oxygen levels rose. And as they moved to land, there was no need for them anymore. For ray-finned fish, these lungs evolved into a swim bladder, which to this day allows fish to control their buoyancy. Another trait modern-day tetrapods have lost is the network of vibration-sensitive canals along the skull and jaw, which don't work outside of water. Well, that's all there is to know about tetrapods. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you for listening. I am out.